The Expanded University, imaginative and boundless. We're back with Expanded University short courses. This time we're going to talk about the new Jedi Order, the long book series, the first of its kind for Star Wars that debuted in 1999. And this time I have with me a very special guest. He's from RK Outpost, Sports Wars, the Patriot Outpost. It's the one and only Ryan Kinel in the house. What's going on, Ryan?
What's up, man? It's good to be here. And it's always good to talk about Star Wars that I actually love instead of Star Wars that I hate. Unfortunately, the time of getting Star Wars I love is over and gone, but it's still there on the bookshelves, which is good.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of came up with this new podcast idea. We had been doing live streams every now and then, but I thought if I do an actual podcast where people can just listen to it and they don't necessarily have to be watching, then it could be out there forever. And it's kind of like a timeless topic. We're not talking about something that is relevant for April of 2022, which is when we're recording this. They could listen to this 5 years from now and still get some value out of it. So I've enjoyed doing them, and it seems like the people like them. I've created a SoundCloud just for this, so I hope everyone enjoys it. And I just want to, right out of the gate, take a minute, coming from a family who has a rich tradition in the Navy, and I want to thank you for your service. We really appreciate that, and I'm glad that you're out, but I'm glad that you also got some value out of that. But I know how it is because my son's already telling me as a sailor himself that he likes it, but it's almost like you want to get out to say, yay, I did it. That accomplishment is behind me.
Yeah, kind of. And first of all, I appreciate it. I was in for 11 years. They did pay me. I didn't just, do it for free, but it's different.
Yes.
It's at the same time, it's just like every other job in terms of there's going to be people you hate and people you love, and moments that you love being there because the people, and moments that you hate being there because of the work, but obviously being in the military, it is a little bit different. So I'm glad that they gave me an opportunity to get my life going in the right direction and some training that I thought I would use going forward. It turns out YouTube is what I'm doing instead, but yeah, it's
you got to go where the money is.
Sure. Well, I never planned to stay in forever, and I knew I had a lot more, money available in the civilian sector in a nuclear power plant than I ever would staying in the military. But YouTube, even though it's not as much money as a nuclear power plant operator right away, at least, I think it has the potential to be bigger than that, and I can be my own boss and all those things. So
yeah, and I'm sure you're good at the nuke stuff, but you're also extremely good at what you're doing here. So fantastic stuff, and we wish you all the success. Links will be in the description, but I'm sure everyone knows who Ryan is. So let's jump right into this. Last night I dug out some old Star Wars insiders I've had. I have ones going all the way back to the late 80s when it was like Lucasfilm fan club magazine. But the very first article was from issue number 43, which probably showed up in people's mailboxes like in February or March of 99, a few months before The Phantom Menace came out. There's a very short, like not even a half page on NJO, and it's primarily with Shelley Shapiro, who was the editor for the publisher, not for Lucasfilm. And she really doesn't go into what the series is even about. It's an invasion, and yes, we will honor Bantam. We're not going to ignore it. We will ignore some things, probably stuff like Crystal Star, but we are going to honor it. Yeah. And we're going to try and make it feel like Star Wars, yet also take it into the future. So she really didn't reveal much except for a couple of interesting things. So she said, if you only read the 5 hardcovers, which off the top of my head, Vector Prime, Balance Point, Star by Star, Destiny's Way, and then the finale, Unifying Force, she said you'll get the whole story, but the paperbacks will, quote unquote, fill it in. I never even thought of just trying to read the paperbacks to see, the hardcovers to see if I get the whole story. Had you ever even heard that?
I've never heard of anyone suggesting that. I have heard of people talk about, there might be a couple books worth skipping, and I don't necessarily disagree. I would never read it that way. But, It was so crazy for Star Wars books to do at that time. A 19 book series spanning across, I think it was like, and you had a couple like ebooks and little novellas and stuff like that, and short stories as well.
Yep.
Like 10 or 12
Comics,
different
too.
authors. Yeah, comic storyline with Dark Horse that tied in.
Mm-hmm.
You had like 10 or 12 authors that were doing this all together and all planning it out. That's insane. And it led to everything that we saw from this era of Star Wars, from Del Rey era of Star Wars going forward. It was revolutionary. And I thought it was incredible, what they did and the ramifications of how they changed things. But I would never, I guess just thinking about it, you would get a Cliff Notes version of NJO if you did just read those 5 books.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if they ever intended anyone to do that, but that's literally what she said in the article, and I found that to be interesting.
I bet those are like, I bet when they sat there in the planning stages, they probably had like almost, 4 phases kind of type of thing. And with
Absolutely.
it bookended by Vector Prime and Unifying Force. But yeah.
I think they even use the term phase if you dig up some of the subsequent interviews over the next 5 years. I actually think they use the word phase. So, I guess you can tie that into like the Marvel stuff, which is different because I think Star Wars actually had a plan, or a better plan. Marvel just seems to book it on the fly and see where it goes. But you mentioned earlier a plan, basically, and that's the first time that they ever sat down and said, wait a minute, I'm not going to go 10 years after Yavin, then go back to 4, skip all around. She actually says in this interview that they can sit down and say subsequent books, one after the other, they can have a storyline, right, where things follow up, and then we're done with that, it's like, all right, let's do the Swarm War, right, then let's do Legacy
of the
then,
Force,
yeah,
Fate. Yeah.
It turned into like a real saga, and that's really when the expanded universe was firing on all cylinders. You can look at stuff from Bantam and say, oh, that was bad, but as a whole, I think this is what really kicked off an era of great storytelling.
I think you have, when you go back and you look at the history of Star Wars, specifically expanded universe stuff, I think you do have a couple different eras, and after the original trilogy, Star Wars was kind of a dead brand, in terms of, I guess you had a couple, you had some Marvel stories they were trying to tell, you maybe had some like cartoons and stuff, but for the most part, no, it wasn't until 91 with Heir to the Empire.
Correct.
That was really seeing the success of that and what the potential could be. Then it was off to the races. Then you had things starting to come out like Dark Empire. You had the Kevin J. Anderson, Tales of the Jedi. You had all these different things that started coming out. But for the things that involved our heroes, it was very monotonous. It was the same thing over and over again. It was like, oh, the twins got kidnapped. Oh, well, there's a problem that everybody needs to solve.
Super weapon.
Yeah, a generic super weapon, a generic evil bad person. It was always an Imperial. It was always like a warlord or some Imperial remnant, something like that, right? This changed the game, and that was their intention. They wanted to change the game. They realized that we can't just keep doing this over and over again. At some point, people are going to get tired of reading Luke, Han, and Leia save the day. They're never really in any danger. And this series was a complete and total game changer in the right way.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I was watching you on Matt Wilkins from like a week or so ago. What's interesting is the origin of this actually came from the comic side. I think it was Veach's idea, or Cam Kennedy, one or the other. I think it would have been Veach that, hey, let's do like a Sith invasion. But Lucas himself said, no, you can't use Sith. So they came up, or even a dark side user or Force user. So they came up with, well, what if we have these aliens that are like holes in the Force? So it actually came from the comic side, and I found that interesting.
I think it was it was somebody at Dark Horse, but I don't think it was
like the editor. I think
it was like Stradley.
Randley Stradley. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's it. Yeah,
that was it.
And because they wanted to launch the Invasion series of comic books and they wanted something to go along with that. And it's so interesting a discussion to have for the people that constantly want to say George didn't care about the expanded universe. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that George Lucas read every novel and every comic book and he was a diehard EU guy. But this entire pitch got packaged up and sent up to George, and he vetoed a ton of it because they wanted Anakin to be the hero of this series. They wanted to kill off Luke Skywalker. They wanted to have the invasion force be a bunch of Sith, right? Like that's what they wanted to happen. George said, you can't kill Luke Skywalker. I don't want Anakin to be the hero. I actually want you to swap that role because Jason was the one who was supposed to die in this. Spoiler alert, I guess if you haven't read these yet, but Jason was supposed to die. Anakin was supposed to be the hero of this series. George didn't want that because he was doing the prequels at the same time. He thought people would be confused between Anakin Skywalker, Anakin Solo. And he also said, no Force users. I don't want you to use Force users for this invasion force. So they had a generic outline, but they really had to go back to the drawing board in a big way to come up with the villains that I really think make this series in the Yuzong Vong.
Oh, absolutely. And they're so weird and different. And that's what really made them effective, I think. That this is something the Jedi had never fought before, whether it's 4,000 years before the movies, during the movies, or in the rest of the expanded universe. So really unique villains for sure.
And I think that when you look at what they did with the Jedi in the Del Rey era, when they started to ramp up their power, their scale of power more, which I think was a good thing, you had to match that. And you had to match that with enemies that were resistant to that would have some type of inherent advantage over Jedi. And that's what they did with the Vong. They're untouchable by the Force. You know, the Jedi can't feel them. They can't anticipate them as well. And that was a struggle, a hurdle for them to overcome.
Yeah, and going back to what you talked about, Lucas vetoing stuff, that's in line from the last podcast we did on the Revenge of the Sith novelization, where he literally redlined Stover's manuscript, saying no, 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 no. So Lucas himself actually redlined the novelization. So he cared about what went into these books, because I think at some point he said, well, I have a brand and I want to make sure that brand is as consistent as possible. But he didn't want to so much be beholden to what the EU was, but he wanted to make sure before it was published that it was right, as right as it could be. So, you know, the haters out there will say that he didn't care and it was this other universe using all these out of context quotes, but he cared because he actually went in and nixed stuff himself. So that's the way it is. And we have ample evidence of that.
Yeah, and obviously for something like Revenge of the Sith, you know he's going to be more involved. And, you know, Stover talked about he sat down with them for a couple days, you know, and went over this stuff. And that makes sense, right? That's something that is inherently, you know, tied to what he's doing in the story that he's telling. And I believe the novelization came out before the movie did. So that even means more so that, you know, you have to be spot on. And he didn't do that with everything. You know, I'm sure he didn't do that with Shadows of Mindor, you know, but yeah, he's definitely involved, not as intricately as a lot of people like to believe, but he wasn't involved in Clone Wars as much as a lot of people like to believe either.
No, that's very true. And yeah, and that novelization had references to the Tartakovsky series. It had references to Shatterpoint. So it had all these other references, not just to the movie itself. And that's what makes it like a really unique novelization. But we're not talking about that. So the book count, it wound up being 19 actual books, paperback and hardback. But I found an article on StarWars.com from December 99 that said 22. And here's where I think that comes from. Originally, I think it was 23. You had the 19 published minus Final Prophecy, because it was added toward the very end. They said, oh, we have to throw this in there to tie up some storylines that we ran out of time on. But then Siege was going to be the third book in Stackpole's duology. It was going to be a trilogy. And then Knightfall was Michael Jan Friedman's canceled trilogy. I think the first book was complete. It might be out there on that one website, Star Wars Timeline or whatever it is. I'm not sure if they have it or not. So if you add all that up and subtract Final Prophecy, then it comes out to 22, 23. So that would have been even longer. I mean, a lot of people did get exhausted, probably, let's say, after Trader and stuff. Because I know a lot of my friends were like, man, this thing is going on forever and stuff. And I'm like, but I think it's great because I want to see where it's going. Did you think it was too long, too short? What did you think, Ryan?
Well, for me, I kind of started reading in the middle of it.
Really?
So not intentionally.
But you
And
started at
what,
the front, you mean?
yeah. What I mean by that
Okay.
is while it was being released, the first book that I saw of it was actually Star by Star in paperback form at a Walmart. And I was like, well, this is weird. I've never seen a Star Wars book like this. At the time, I had read the Jedi Apprentice books, and I had read the Thrawn trilogy, and I'd read the X-Wing books. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's probably all I had, maybe more, but I know for sure I had those ones. And I saw this book, I would pick it up and I like start reading it like initially. And I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. Like this has to be part of like a series. And I, look at the front, it's like, oh, this is a part of a series. So
Mm-hmm.
I held off and I'm like, let me find everything else. And
Right.
ironically enough, I couldn't find Vector Prime for like a few
Wow.
months. So I had to start with Dark Tide. I think Dark Tide Ruins the first one.
Onslaught's the first one.
Okay, yeah, Dark Tide
Yep.
Onslaught. So I just start with that one, and you immediately get thrown into like, well, Chewbacca, what?
Mm-hmm.
So I read it in a little bit funny way that first time, but to me, I think most of the books were out at that point, you know.
Right.
So it's not like I was waiting and anticipating as they were coming. I had no problem with the length at that time. It's all I did. That was what I did around school. I carried around whatever Star Wars book I was reading. I had it in my little like Trapper Keeper binder and would read at school when I had some downtime. So I had no issues with it. But 19 books is a lot. There's no denying that.
Imagine if, they had gone the full 23, 24, plus all the short stories, plus those ebooks. It would have been insane.
And I wonder too if some of those like ebooks, maybe ended up. They're like, you know what, recovery. Maybe we don't need to do a whole thing. You know what I mean? Maybe we don't
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
do a whole novel about recovery. Maybe we don't need to do a whole one on Yelja or however you say that. So maybe that's where some of those went, but I'm not sure.
I've always pronounced that like Elysia. I don't know if
I
that's
I,
right or
I
not.
think that's completely right. But I always said Yelja because that's how I pronounce it. That's completely wrong. It's Ylesia, I think.
Yeah,
So
we need to
Elysia
get
is
like
probably right.
the Han Solo audiobooks and see, because I have no idea, because I read those when they first came out, and that's just in my mind how I read it. But you could be right too. Who knows?
Well,
But yeah,
I remember Tycho. I used to when I first saw that word, I pronounced it Taicho, uh, like Kelsu or something. Like I
yeah.
pronounced it completely wrong until I realized I was pronouncing it wrong, and yeah, it was a shock to the system.
Yeah, I've always said Tycho Selchu with an
That
S.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really don't do audiobooks. I find that my mind drifts if I'm driving or if I'm just sitting here and I'm like, shit, I don't know what they've said for the past 3 minutes. So I have to read because I'm actively doing it and I'm absorbing what I'm reading, but I can't do the audios. I just can't focus on them. But if it had been 24, that would have been extremely long, but I would have welcomed it because it was Star Wars, and the more the merrier. I know when they announced Final Prophecy saying, hey, we're adding a book to the rotation. I think that was Keys that they brought back in, Gregory Keys. Because, they had spent 3 books out at Bakura with the Siru, and it's like, okay, this is kind of a tangent a little bit. And yeah, the Vong were involved, but they really weren't that much. If you go back and read that trilogy, it was more to develop Tahiri and stuff like that. But at the same time, they're like, we can't wrap all this up in a huge, thick, unifying force. So we got to add another book in there. So I was excited about that. But I think they kind of learned that some fans did get fatigue, and that's why the following ones were like a trilogy and 9 book series. So I don't know what the Sword of the Jedi was going to be. I
It was
assume it would
supposed to
have
be
been
a
another 9.
trilogy. It would have been a trilogy.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But yeah, and I do think that the Force Heretic, I think it's a trilogy. Those are the
It
ones right
is.
before Final Prophecy and Divine Force. Like, I do think that is maybe the worst part of the series, unfortunately, and that might be
It is.
why it does feel fatigued, because you have a lot of good stuff. Vector Prime. Some people are gonna love it. Some people are gonna hate it because Chewie died. But R.A. Salvatore is a great science fiction fantasy writer, and they tapped
Yes.
him to do this. He did a great job opening it up and setting the tone for what the rest of it would be. And I love the fact that you used so many authors, because that meant that these different duologies all had a different feel. So to bring in a guy like Michael Stackpole to do to do the Dark Tide books and introduce us to the new age of Rogue Squadron, when you get Gavin
Yep.
Darklighter and then Jaina Solo somehow gets added to Rogue Squadron in a pinch. But you
Yeah, that was
have
interesting.
It was interesting. I think it'd be funny to see what would happen, what we'd say if that came out today, and what we'd say about a 16-year-old
Yeah,
Jaina
definitely.
Solo getting an opportunity with Rogue Squadron.
We call it the she-you instead of the EU, I think. So
Yeah, the Star Wars she-you, maybe. But it was, it's not like that character was just thrust there. You have an entire
Right.
Young Jedi Knights novel or series to get to know Jaina and Jason and a lot of the other ancillary characters that become so important in this series.
And they were going on these some of those missions were outlandish in the
They're
Young Jedi
terrible.
Knights.
Yeah.
But at the same time they did pick up that experience and stuff like that, so it wasn't completely out of left field. Plus that third book in Dark Tide could have explained more, because I want to get to something else later that I thought just came out of nowhere, just like her being in Rogue Squadron. I'll bring that up when we get to that topic, but it did kind of just happen out of nowhere. But yes, Salvatore did a great job, but let's talk about the Chewie thing, because I don't have the issue of Insider where they have this huge, like several page story on uh, just justifying the death and stuff, because they had to, because they got a lot of hate mail, supposed death threats. I was at Celebration 2 on a couple of panels. No, I wasn't on the panel, but I was in the room. And he was up there, Bob Salvatore, and he's talking about how he himself got death threats and he couldn't go to a couple of cons because he was kind of scared. Maybe he was playing up the drama there, but I kind of believe it, because you know how some Star Wars fans are. But every character has to die at some point. That's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, and I do totally believe it. It's almost like, shockingly enough, despite what the mainstream media wants to say, fandom has always been passionate. Always. It's not toxic, but there are people in every single community that take stuff too far, take stuff too seriously. Doesn't matter if you're in a Star Wars group, or maybe it's a church or a school. Like, there's always going to be weird people out there that take things too far and take things too seriously. But yeah, it was a shock to the system. It was like the family dog that killed off the family dog in a
I
way.
was about to bring up the dog aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, and imagine the backlash there. What if they'd got to do what they wanted to do? What if George Lucas had okayed killing off Luke Skywalker?
Yeah, it would
Like,
have been Last Jedi reaction, I
he,
think.
he probably would have actually got, somebody probably would have taken a shot if that had happened.
Yeah.
But I liked it, and I cried when I read it for the first time, because it was
Hmm.
so powerful, and it's exactly the way that Chewbacca would have wanted to go out.
Hmm.
That is so true to his character and everything. And that's why this book was important, because you had never seen Han Solo that scared. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, and you could, like, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it right now. Just like envisioning that, because at first his youngest child is about to die. That's legitimately what's going to happen. His youngest child is about to
Yep.
die as a moon is coming crashing down on this planet that they really don't care about. And he's just trying to do the right thing and get as many people off as he possibly can. And his youngest child, who's helping him, is about to die. And then his best friend wades out in the midst of everything to save his child, right? To fulfill that life debt that he's always owed Han, like that first was a life debt, but then became a true brotherhood. And to get him back and to get so close to coming back, but just keep getting pushed away and pushed away. And Han can see him when his son, and Han can't even make the decision. Han can't leave him behind, which is something we probably don't talk about as much. Han was ready to die along with his son because he didn't want to leave Chewbacca behind. But Anakin has to make the decision to leave. And Han blames Anakin for that.
Yeah.
And that weighs on Anakin's shoulders throughout the rest of the time that he's alive until Star by Star. It affects every decision that Anakin makes.
Yeah, that's what really made it sad in a way, because we love Han Solo. He's Han Solo, and then this happens, and it's like, wow, just, I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but just that was his brother. That was his. I mean, they were as close as you could get to soulmates without it being romantic. You know what I mean? They were that close, and then he died. And then his son was kind of wrapped up in the middle of it, and the way he reacted to it, it made you think that, yeah, it's probably realistic, but like, I don't want him to be doing this. But I think in the end, he kind of realized what he'd been doing that was wrong, and he learned from it, because they're even talking about that in Legacy of the Force, which I'm reading now. They're still talking about it. Jason brings it up.
It was a very real, raw moment. And they, again, this is one of those things that I think is done very well in this series of books, that if people did this today in current day Star Wars with the way it's been treated, we'd have a problem with it. Look at the way that Han was in Force Awakens. There, his kid falls to the dark side and he abandons his entire family basically for like 2 decades or something.
Right.
Like something insane. In this one, Han goes through a couple week period where he is drinking. He doesn't really care about what's going on with his family. He kind of goes off and does his own thing for a while. And he needs that space in a way. And there's moments where his family needs him and he's not there. And what is redeeming about that is, one, that Han does come back to them, but when Anakin dies, Han is the one that steps up. Han is the one that is there for Leia when she's legitimately fucking broken.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And what took him coming back really was when Leia's legs got hurt, when her legs got damaged by, War Master Savong Long. Yeah. I think that's how you say it. That's what got him back. When Leia legitimately was in trouble, he was there and he wanted to help her recover. And then when Leia went through the same type of broken experience that Han did, he didn't crumble. He was there. He learned, and he made sure that never happened again.
Yeah, and like I was saying, like when we saw it happening though, like in the Agents of Chaos duology, we didn't know he was going to come back because they've killed Chewie. What are they going to do here? And I remember people like Han Solo fans being just as mad at the way he was behaving as Chewie's death. Like, why are they making him act like this? But again, they did have a plan the whole time. He was going to come back, and it made sense. He needed his space, and he really. And here's where I thought it was brilliant in Luceno, when he tied a lot back to the daily novels, because Han kind of reverted to his mindset at that age. So Roa, his old buddy, shows up in that book, and they go on that mission, and he was still trying to help the situation because they were trying to hunt down the what was the name of that organization that was kind of like traitorous?
It was like
Peace Brigade.
Yeah, it was like humans that were helping the Vong.
Yes. So they were still kind of involved, but he was doing it like old way, like the old Han way with his old buddies and all that stuff. They went to the wheel and all that space station. So I kind of like how they tied it back to the old stuff.
It was like he wanted to just get away, but when something presented itself that he realized, I have to follow up. Like, I can't just not do anything about this. He was there.
Exactly. Yes. But again, it scared us all because it's like it's Han. He can't do this. He learned in Return of the Jedi, right? But no,
It's
it's his best friend. It's his
yeah.
his his buddy for life. His
It's a bold move, you know. It's a bold
yes,
move to do that. Not over. It's one thing to do it in a movie that lasts 2 hours long, and he spends 30 minutes of time,
yeah,
30 minutes of screen time. But when it's two books, when they're released, probably 3 months apart,
right,
so you have this like 6 month period of people reading a 12-hour book, 15-hour book that they're like, what's going to happen with this dude? Yeah, it's bold.
yeah, definitely. Uh, and then to back up a little bit here, we kind of went into that Han Solo topic, which is great. But to back up a little bit here, they did tease some of this stuff, like Nominor, the member of the Praetorate Vong. He was the executor rank. He was kind of like as part the what do you call it, like the lead invasion force, and then he was in Crimson Empire 2, just stirring up chaos and stuff. He was an agent of chaos, trying to mess with the Imperial ruling council, destabilizing it, all that stuff. But we didn't know that at the time. Who is this guy? Just some random dark character with a hood on, right? We
Yeah,
didn't know that he would be in a book series. And I don't even know if I'm
I
sure
don't
they
think they
intended
did
it,
either.
but I do think that if they never did the book series, he still would have been out there, right?
Hmm.
They didn't have to like say, "Hey, this guy was meant to do this in the book." But if they wanted to use him, they could have. So I thought that was kind of cool that they had a like what's the term I'm looking for? Like a leading force, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah. It was an advanced force that
Advanced force. Thank you.
essentially was destabilizing things to make sure that
Hmm.
when the time did come for the invasion, that people would be divided, that people would be more upset about petty, stupid stuff than they would be about kind of uniting together over the Vong, over this invasion. And Nominor is a very interesting character because he does spend so much time here in this galaxy among, I, I'll say humans for lack of a better term because they're the most prevalent, but among everyone in our galaxy,
Right.
in the Star
Right.
Wars galaxy. And what that does to Nominor is it makes him the most human of the Vong, which means he doesn't really totally buy into this whole embrace of pain anymore. He doesn't really totally buy into the self-flagellation. He does it to keep appearances sake, but he doesn't really want to. And every moment where you would see a regular, whether you see a warrior or a priest or a shaper, they would whether it's sacrifice themselves or do whatever they could to make sure they did the most damage to the enemy. Nominor did not.
Yes.
Nominor saved his own skin. And so it's cool to have that character that was throughout the entire series.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's exactly what he was doing in Vector Prime on that Ramamul planet, like stirring up anti-droid sentiment and maybe some racial tension, and then they sent Leia out there to try and calm things down, and well, it worked because that planet fell. So pretty cool how they teed that up to where they could use him if they wanted, but if not, it was just some random character in a comic book series, and then a year later, about 6 months after Vector Prime came out, Rogue Planet came out. Terrible book. I don't know if you've ever read it.
I did read it and I had no idea what it was talking about.
Yeah,
I feel like the book came out too soon.
it did.
And like it was funny because I didn't know if I'd read things out of order or like what, because again, I didn't get them when it came out.
Hmm.
I was, picking them up, as I could.
Right.
But I read that book and I'm like, it is very boring. But this like
Yes.
idea of, I guess, Anakin bonding with these seeds and making these ships, okay, that's whatever. It was one of those that I read, but I didn't process it. I just like powered through it because I felt like I had to. And I love the character of Obi-Wan. Um,
Right.
but yeah, man. And then for them to tie all of that so intricately into what happens at the end was weird. It felt weird. It felt like the book came out at the wrong time.
Yeah. So they could have done an awesome Anakin and Obi-Wan book, which they kind of did in the Apprentice series, which started coming out months before Rogue Planet did, and then done a better short story or ebook if they wanted to tie something in and not done it in 2000. They could have done it like in, I don't know, let's say 0304 when Zenoma Seacott actually started showing up in the story. because otherwise it's like, who the hell remembers that from that forgettable book 4 or
Yeah.
5 years before? So you're exactly right.
And
Way
I
too
also
early.
think that I also think that if you see Vergier and like you hear about them talking about Vergier in that, I think it
Yeah.
lessens a little. I think it takes some of the mystery away from her character in NJO. You know,
Yep. Because you already know
so
where she came from.
right, you're like, okay, well, this is a Jedi. What's she doing with them? Like, blah blah blah. You're thinking like that, as opposed to just immediately assuming that this person is with them. You know.
Yes. Yep. I don't think there were too many other tie-ins because they were the first Del Rey books, right?
Hmm.
So there wasn't a lot else to tie into. At least then later on, like after the series was over, even Zahn tied in Outbound Flight because she was in that as well for a little bit, and maybe a few other books. But during the series, there weren't a lot of other tie-ins. Uh, let's talk about. We kind of touched on this a little bit, and this is what I was talking about with Stackpole's series, Dark Tide, Jason, because out of nowhere, he just says, "Hey, Luke, I'm questioning myself, and I don't know if I want to be a Jedi because I feel like the Jedi have strayed from their roots." And I don't really know what drove that decision from Vector Prime because that was early on in the first Stackpole book. Like, it's just they wanted him to have that feeling, so they wrote it in there because he never really justified other than I'm being an emo kid or something. Do you remember there being any driver for him saying, I'm questioning whether or not I want to call myself a Jedi and use the Force, because he felt like the more he used it, the more like bad stuff happened? Like, what would have caused him to make that decision, Ryan?
Well, it's tough to remember right now. I guess I probably should have done a reread, but it's tough to do a reread of 19 books. But in Vector Prime, um, I feel like there's conflict between Jason and Anakin in that. Just in terms of how they feel, like the role of a Jedi should be. And I do feel in Vector Prime, they do set it up where they see what Kip's doing, and like Anakin's like all about it. Jaina wants to really impress him, and Jason's kind of like standoffish about what Kip is doing in that. Um, but with all that being said, I I like what they did, and I like what they did with the Jedi. The idea that this new Jedi Order, which is still small,
100 Jedi
yeah,
approximately. Yeah.
they specifically number it
Yep.
100 Jedi,
Hmm.
which I don't know if that's a number that you think's good or bad. Does that include every student, or is it just people that they consider trained?
Right.
I'm not sure, but we know it obviously continued to very much grow after that. A lot of these guys end up dying in this series,
Definitely.
but you have Luke, who is obviously built the entire thing, but you have a hothead in Kip who very much wants to force the action. He wants to be the one that attacks these things head on. And ironically, we get halfway through this story and you realize that Kip, although maybe not coming from the best mental position, was right. That's what they should have
Yep.
been doing. That Luke Skywalker, and that's another thing I love about this series, is that Luke Skywalker was paralyzed by his fear of the dark side. He was
Yes.
absolutely paralyzed by it. That is his fatal flaw. And we finally get that, really fleshed out in this. And the hesitancy of Luke Skywalker to take action for fear of he or his students falling to the dark side resulted in the deaths of trillions of people. You know,
That's always been Superman's weakness too, because he can pretty much do anything, but his weakness is that he won't, because he's afraid of the damage he'll cause. He's a Boy Scout, and I think there's a pretty close parallel here with Luke.
yeah, and I think in Dark Empire, when Luke goes too close to the sun and it's only barely pulled back, with the
Hmm.
reborn emperor and everything like that. I think that scared him. Like
Hmm.
he felt like if he gives into that type of power, he'll go. And what we see, I think, in NJO is Luke Skywalker willing to open up and embrace his power with the realization that when he's centered in himself, you know, he has faith in the Force, he has trust in the Force, and nothing's going to happen. And that is kind of how we then get this Luke Skywalker who does embrace his power, and we get God tier Grandmaster Skywalker, which is awesome.
You get the green Force lightning. I mean,
yeah, you do. And but I guess we're kind of floating off topic. Back to Jason and his questioning. It's not like it's set up from the Young Jedi Knights or whatever, but I do feel like they try to paint Jason as a little bit different and like more thoughtful, at this point in his life in terms of what he thinks about using the Force as opposed to his brother and his sister.
Well, he was always more earthy. He was the one with the animals, while Anakin and Jaina were more the mechanics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, he was a little bit more hippie-ish than they were. For sure. By the way, Jedi, it's no longer space wizards, it's now magic hippies, according to, I think it was Gizmodo. So we got to call them magic hippies now. But there is a scene, to go back to what you said, in Onslaught where they have a meeting, like a Jedi meeting, and then Kip's like, let's go on the attack. And then there's kind of an argument, and Luke says, hey, I agree with Jason, we're not going to do this. So it could have been in reaction to Kip that, wow, I'm going to react to this guy being he has so much hubris and stuff. Let's just go at him. Well, maybe that kind of triggered him to push back. Plus, you have the brotherly feud, whatever you want to call it. Because now that you mention it, there were some conversations in Vector Prime where they did disagree on philosophy and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you're exactly right. It could have been like, I'm going to overcompensate by just straight up saying I may leave the Order and not even really use the Force.
Yeah.
So that's probably it.
And I think that it's tough. It's tough trying to recall, but it was either in, Vector Prime or Onslaught where Jason and Anakin actually have a little lightsaber duel, if I remember right. And I think Jason beats Anakin or something, even though Anakin trains and trains and trains and trains.
I have zero recollection of that. I'll have to go look that up. Mm-hmm. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly when it was. It could have been still in Dark Tide, because Anakin goes on a little journey in Dark Tide as well. Obviously he's dealing with what happened with Chewbacca and feeling the guilt from that. And I believe in, is it Ruin where they end up on Dantooine and he's trying to protect Mara and everything?
Yeah, it's in one of those two. Yes.
Yeah. And, it all runs together. It's 19 books, but yeah. So Anakin goes. I love this about this entire book series because it goes over 9 or 10 books till you get to Star by Star, and Jason goes on this journey, and Anakin goes on a journey where they both come to respect each other's point of view, and unfortunately, it basically happens right when Anakin dies. In Star by Star.
Yes.
But that teaches Jason something. And Jason, he goes on to have so much respect for his brother and what he did that he names his Star Destroyer after Anakin, in Legacy of the Force.
Much to his parents' chagrin, yes.
Much to his parents' chagrin. But yeah, it's cool. And for Jason, balance point is really like the coming to terms point for Jason, because balance point is when he starts to have a vision of and I think that vision that he's having, the Force vision of, if I take one step the wrong way,
he misses the lightsaber, catching the lightsaber. Yeah.
And if I take a wrong step one way, then everything could fall. I think that is a lot of internal stuff from Jason. I think that's how he feels all the time. I think he feels so uncertain about what he's supposed to do and what his path is as a Jedi. Who should he be? Should I try to emulate Kip? Am I more like Corran Horn? But Corran Horn is way too loyal to the government for me. All this.
Oh, he is big time. Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting. And that is how you put, a political, spin on all of this stuff. It's not sitting and lecturing, it's one character who is a protagonist who has a different opinion on the role that government should play in the Jedi Order, and another one who's very staunchly pro-government because of his experience in the military as part of the government and all those things. Like that's how those things need to be done and handled in books.
It's called showing and not telling.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I've always said. You show a story if you want to be a good storyteller. You don't tell it. You don't tell people something. You show it to them. And you expect your audience to be savvy enough to see it and understand it and not have this anvilicious message where they stare at the camera, break the fourth wall, and just go on a diatribe. But that's what happens in today's entertainment, Star Wars included.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, obviously Jason is the hero of this book, or of this book series. It wasn't planned, but that's what happens, and this sets up so much for what the next path for Del Rey was: Dark Nest trilogy and ultimately Legacy of the Force.
Yeah, and he does in Balance Point finally use the Force again. I think once it's like, well, I have to use it right now or else we're gonna die. But by the end, he's back to using it again. So
It's to save his mom.
He had to save his mother. Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, it's to save his mom.
Yes.
And I believe it's because War Master, once he realizes that there's twins, because the Yuzong Vong have this obsession with twins because two of their gods are twins, and twins in the Yuzong Vong culture are very, very rare, to the point where every set of twins basically battle to the death to determine who becomes the next like supreme leader.
Yes.
That's how important twins are to their culture. So when they find out that not only are Luke and Leia twins, but then Leia, a twin, has twins, they become very obsessed with them. And I believe
so cool
that part of Balance Point was the War Master trying to get Jason to fight him. You know what I mean? To get that glory of fighting a Jedi twin in battle. And at that point in time, if I remember right, Jaina is dealing with blindness from going extravehicular with Rogue Squadron. So she's kind of out of commission, and Jason's in his period where I don't want to use the Force type of thing, as they're trying.
You're 100% correct, because I read that summary earlier tonight. Yeah, the twin thing. Tell me that's not inventing a new mythology. That's just so cool. Twins of twins. I'm gonna beat one of these twins to like solidify my reign. That's just that's new mythology right there.
The Yuzong Vong were really cool. They were cool and interesting because they were religious fanatics, but in a very unique way. They glorified pain and suffering, right? That's what it was, and like only by achieving true pain and suffering could you be close, could you understand what all these different gods really want you to understand. And they didn't use machinery of any kind. They hated technology. They tried to destroy it anywhere that they could. They thought it was blasphemous to their bio-organic ships and equipment. They had the Vondum crab armor. They had the amphistaffs that they grew. They had
thud bugs.
They had thud bugs. They had this jelly that would kind of move around and try to pin people in place. They had Yamasks, which were like, they could basically control their fleets by a type of bug-like hive mind type of psychic control. They had world brains that engineered their how to grow and terraform worlds. It was a lot of really cool shit.
Ooglith cloakers.
Yeah.
What were the masks called where you could breathe underwater?
The starfish things.
Yeah. I have the freaking source book pulled out here from Wizards of the Coast.
I don't remember what they were called. I know there were starfish things where basically like one tentacle extended down your throat, and it was always like disgusting when people put them on. Like
you're talking about the Blorash jelly. Yeah.
The Blorash jelly is like the jelly they throw on the ground.
It was called a Newlith. GN Newlith.
There it is.
Awesome. Yeah. Ooglith maskers, Ooglith cloakers, the Villips that create the singularities. Yeah. Really interesting
no.
stuff.
So the Villips are how they communicate. So it's like a little.
That's right.
It's a little organic thing that'll kind of take you the approximate shape of whoever's talking. So it's
like
a communication device.
Yeah.
The Dovin basils are, and that was
Dovin
so
basil,
cool.
yep.
Dovin basils are how they not only propelled their ships but shielded their ships, and they created small, tiny black holes. And there's a scene in one of the Dark Tide books where they have this big army of like drone slaves and some warriors, and they're like marching, and they have these, they have these ground vessels effectively with Dovin basils, and you can't really get by them. And so Luke does this thing where he sits back in the shuttle and he like closes his eyes and he focuses, and he can't feel like their equipment. He can't feel the Vong in the Force. He can't feel any of their, bio engineered stuff in the Force,
right?
But he can feel everything else. And he finds the point in time where all life is like, every little bug is getting sucked into oblivion, and he realizes that's like the black hole of this Dovin basil. And he controls effectively like the molecules on the outskirts of it so that it can't be moved. So that
I remember that, yeah.
And so if they're trying to intercept things, they can't. So then the Dovin basil starts to work overtime and pull and pull and pull and pull. And then finally, when it's pulling as hard as he can, Luke essentially shoves that in the same direction that the Dovin basil is pulling, and it overcompensates, and the entire thing collapses in its own black hole. And then Luke,
I totally remember that.
Yep. And then Luke immediately passes out from the from how difficult it was for him to do that.
But he didn't die, so that's always a plus.
That's true.
Now, here's what's interesting. Since we're on Dark Tide, there was a conscious effort after the first 3 books to make the Vong less extreme. I remember reading an article or an interview somewhere on that, because they were so like masochist and stuff. Like, I remember the first guy, can't remember his name, like Nomen Carr, I think he was the first one to invade that outpost. It's like he's running, then he picks up like a electrical wire and just bites it to electrocute himself. Yeah, stuff like that. And then Stackpole, I thought, did a great job making them very violent, very masochistic, very sadistic, all that stuff. But I read somewhere after that it kind of weirded some people out. So if you look at the following books, I think the Anakin story came after the Luceno books, the Edge of Victory, and they're decidedly less violent because it's mainly what were the scientists called? The Shapers. The Shaper cast. They were a little bit less like that than the Warriors and even the religious ones. So that was really interesting where they had changed it. I liked how violent they were and stuff. I thought it made them different. But by the end of the series, they weren't as bad as they were in the first 3 in terms of how sick they were in the head and stuff.
I think that once you establish it, then you don't need to like make every single story about that necessarily, because it's not like, I mean, after all of that happens, we still have Star by Star, where they breed Voxen that essentially spit acid at these people. They just die brutally disgusting ways. Jason gets, kidnapped and literally tortured for months and months and months. You know what I mean? So they still are, they still show how sick and demented the society is. But yeah, and I do think that the Anakin storyline was a little bit of a softer storyline because it involved like a 14 and 15-year-old. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because that's Anakin and Tahiri. That is, and that's when you get kind of more introduced to the shamed ones. So you effectively have 4 different casts of the Vong. You have the warriors, you have the priests, you have the shapers, who are the ones that kind of create all the technology and everything. And then you have the shamed ones. The shamed ones are people who have effectively been rejected. They're kind of like if the Spartans, instead of throwing their babies off a cliff, if instead they just let them grow up and be little slaves. Like that's kind of what the shamed ones are, because they're ones who have defects, or when they try to sacrifice a body part and attach a different thing to them, it didn't work out, it rotted, it didn't take, that kind of thing.
Yeah, more great mythology there for sure. But yeah, and those two books, Edge of Victory, they were quasi young adult books, if I remember correctly. I haven't read them in 20 years, but when I did, I got that sense that, and nothing's wrong with young adult books, but they are what they are. And I kind of got that sense because I've read the definition that a young adult book means it could be just like a regular novel, but the characters are young adult age. And that's pretty much what we were dealing with in that duology. So,
Yeah,
not
and
that they were bad or anything.
I liked him fine. And you get this is when Anakin, I believe, Anakin starts to show some like real power as well in this. He has shown power his entire life, really, from turning on Centerpoint Station, in like the Corellia trilogy to a bunch of other stuff. But there's one point where like there's a fire. Like a fire gets started, or he starts a fire or something, and he gets kind of trapped in the middle, and he actually like uses the Force to protect himself and absorb the energy and like push it up to protect them. When he's running around with that shamed one, which I forget that shamed one's name, but
that wasn't Onimi, right? That was a different character.
Correct. Onimi was the jester who ends up being behind the whole thing.
Yep.
But yeah. And that's also where he gets that crystal that he kind of bonds with for his lightsaber, which allows him his Vong sense, to kind of detect.
Yes, I remember that now.
To kind of detect the Vong, which then becomes very important because Vergier implants like a Yorick coral seed or something in Jason, which allows him to also have a Vong sense in his torture, if I remember right.
Yeah, they thought that they had removed it in Balance Point, but I think it had grown back in his cheek or whatever it was, if I remember correctly. Or was it during Traitor that they planted another one?
I think that during well, I don't know if it was
because he was in the Embrace of Pain in Balance Point as well. Not very long though.
So in Balance Point, is that when he thinks he can like take him on by himself and gets beaten and put in the Embrace of Pain in Balance Point? I thought it was before that, because I thought it was before that, and that was one of the things that made Jason start to question like his actions as a Jedi, because he effectively had a vision of him going like up to where they were abusing these people, because he was with Luke for that, because Luke came in double lightsabers blazing and fucked people up to save Jason and to get the little seed out of his cheek. And it might have
been in Dark Tide. It might have been.
I think it was. I think it was in Dark Tide, because that's really another point where Jason is like really questioning. Because
another example of how these run together so much, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. But yeah, either way, I like the Edge of Victory stuff.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. But Centerpoint, I was going to bring this up a while back in the discussion, but I like that they actually brought it back. Oh no, super weapon of the week, but it never got destroyed, and they used it smartly. Guess what? It's still around in Legacy of the Force. I like how that, and then with the Anakin references and all that stuff, they had that weird droid that the space station thought was him. So I like how that gigantic, colossal space station, almost as big as the Death Star, more powerful than the Death Star, that it stayed around so long, and they found a way to constantly use it and then tie it back to him. I thought that was cool because, again, she said they weren't going to ignore Bantam. They didn't ignore the characters. They didn't ignore the situations already set up, and I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, you get some Thrak and Sal Solo as well in that.
Yeah.
So they definitely did it. And interestingly enough, I know you haven't read Fate of the Jedi yet, so I won't.
Not yet.
I won't spoil.
I know what happens in all of it. I've read summaries and all that.
Right.
So
the destruction of Centerpoint Station is very important to what happens in Fate of the Jedi and why that's even a problem.
Gotcha.
So it kind of gets into why Centerpoint Station was a thing, like why it existed, and what those what the importance of it was.
Gotcha. I didn't get all the details, but I kind of read this is where Luke and all them wind up and stuff. Because I'm not about, oh, I got to read something to find out what happens. It's more like, or what happens, it's how it happens. So I wanted to know where they all wound up and stuff. I know what happens in Crucible and all that, but I'm still going to read them because I want to see how it happens and all the character interactions and stuff. So I don't know all the details. So that's good because, that's something to find out. Um, but that's Jason in a nutshell, and then Luke. So Luke, we kind of touched on him earlier for several books. I don't think it was until, man, it was later on until he had a vote before he finally decided, are we going to take it to him? He had the Jedi vote and they all voted, yes, let's do it. So for me, it's not that he didn't trust his own judgment, but he almost wanted that validation. Like, do I have enough people, a consensus to say that, yes, I'm making the correct decision? So I thought that was an interesting approach that he took to finally make the decision to fight a war.
Yeah, so there's Star by Star is the middle point of the
Correct.
of this
Yes.
series, right? And I don't know if numerically it's exactly the middle, but for all intents and purposes, it's the middle because it is the Empire Strikes Back of this series. It is the low point. Star by Star is a dark fucking book.
Oh yeah.
And it's a moment where not only is this young next generation of Jedi all going on effectively a suicide mission, you don't know who's coming back, but also for the rest of the galaxy, the Vong are marching to Coruscant, and you legit have trillions of people dying there. When all of this happens, and so it's a turning point because then in the aftermath of that, you get essentially the reconstruction of the government, which affects Star Wars as we know it going forward, where the government flees to Mon Calamari. They effectively, like, Luke takes part in rigging an election.
Yes.
Right. Luke Skywalker and the Jedi and Lando Calrissian take part in rigging the election for the Galactic Alliance so that Cal Omas can win, which I don't feel like gets addressed enough. I don't feel like we properly address the ramifications of
Destiny's
the Jedi.
Way, right?
Destiny's Way, yeah.
Yep.
So that's kind of crazy, but yeah, that is a turning point for Luke Skywalker. Having the death of his nephew on his conscience, having the presumed death of Jason on his conscience, because Jason, although he was captive, he was presumed dead by everyone except for
no one
Jaina.
knew that. Yeah,
except for Jaina. Well, was it Jaina or Leia?
I don't remember.
I actually think Jaina thought he was dead because Jaina went at a really dark time in Dark Journey, obviously aptly named, because she felt their twin bond, I think, go out and just assumed he was dead and couldn't even handle the possibility of him being alive. But Leia, I don't think ever actually gave up on him. So Luke's perspective is changed by that. And you have a character in Star by Star as well that dies called Borsk Phalia, who...
Oh, great moment.
It's one of the greatest redemption moments in Star Wars history. Borsk is a person that is hated since the moment he's introduced. You're supposed to hate him. He's a terrible person. He's an antagonist. He's a slimy piece of shit. But in that moment, when he sacrifices himself in the palace or wherever he was at the time, it was awesome. And that changes everything because Luke sees what happened by him not being aggressive. He realizes that they now control the entire galaxy or half of the galaxy. I've lost dozens of Jedi because of my hesitancy. And that's kind of what kicks him into gear.
Yeah, and once he does it, it's so awesome because he's in an X-Wing and they have that one battle. I can't remember the name of the planet, but it shows them coming out of hyperspace in the book. And then it says he made an attack run like just below the speed of light. I'm like, that's just so awesome. Like Luke is back. And that's, I hate to make all these comparisons, but that's like the moment that fans never really got in the Disney trilogy. You know, he never really came back, and
Yeah.
this is the real Luke and stuff. So when we saw that, it's like, wow, great. He's using his lightsaber again. He's having duels. He's flying an X-wing. He's leading the Jedi. That's what we wanted to see. And they were brilliant with it because they made us wait for it. And just when we probably got tired of waiting and we couldn't have waited any longer, then they brought him back. So like the real Luke. Fantastic stuff for sure.
What I think one of the cool things as well that gets utilized so much from this point on, and in Vector Prime they set it up, the mind meld between Anakin, Jason, and Jaina, and the idea that 3 minds acting as one, and how effective
When
they
they're
can
on
be
Lando's obstacle course thing.
when they're running the maze, or I forget,
whatever the hell it's called.
It's an asteroid field that's, you know, totally randomized basically, and it's like essentially like Kip had the highest score, I think, there, and then Jaina went on like a crazy autistic run and like destroyed Kip's record. And then it's actually, that's where I know we're going back to the beginning with Chewbacca, but it's one of the last Chewbacca memories we get. Han and Chewie run it in a TIE bomber that's meant for like a 2-person run, and they see them kind of slip and gently curve over an asteroid and make like a neat little flip around one. You know, that's like the perspective of everyone watching. And then you get in the TIE bomber, and it's just like Han and Chewie just fucking screaming at each other because they can't determine which way they want to go. And so they're like almost crashing into everything, but to everyone on the outside, it just looks like they're that confident they can just slip by, kind of thing. It's so funny. So
yeah, great writing there for sure. Yeah, so that was Luke, and you know, he goes all the way to the end, and then he has the duel. It wasn't just his duel because Jason was there as well with what's his name? Shimra, the Supreme Overlord.
Yeah, so Jason, it was Jason, Jaina, and Luke, I believe.
Yeah, she was there as well. Yes.
And which is crazy and awesome. Just to think about that. Luke Skywalker with his niece and nephew that he's trained, who they're probably like 18 now, you know, something like that, going to face Supreme Overlord Shimra, this beast, this Hulk, this monster leader of the Yuzong Vong. And they had to fight their way all the way up there to get there too. So just very cool. But yeah, as that happens, I guess I'm a little bit unclear as like the exact stuff, but Jason kind of understands that Shimra's not, like, something's telling him that Shimra's not the one pulling the strings, that it's not him that's in control. And that's when he realizes that it's Omni or Onami, however you say his name, the shamed one who's been the one pulling the strings, who actually can touch the Force in some way, you know?
Yep.
And Jason ends up effectively becoming, you know, one with the Force and destroying him right there, which is crazy.
Yeah, and Luke kind of beheads him in the style that Anakin did Dooku.
Yeah, double-bladed lightsaber, cool. I think,
yes.
or 2 lightsabers in his hand. He just slashes his head off.
After being bitten by a snake, by an amphistaff, because he had to let go of the neck so he could grab the other lightsabers. So, what a boss. Yeah, great scene.
Luke gets beat to shit sometimes. I love it when Luke gets beat to shit in the EU, you know, and that was one of those, but it, especially there's a duel. I don't know if you've read the whole thing coming up in Legacy of the Force yet or not, but there's a duel at one point between Jason and Luke.
Is it the one that's in Jason's like meditation chamber and it's dark and all? Oh yeah, great one. Fantastic.
Yeah, and they both come out of that really messed up. And then
it was disgusting, a lot of it. Like, you know, he's using the chair, the embrace of pain chair on him, and he's getting blisters on his face, and I was like, damn, it was good.
And
like,
at one point, like
somebody film.
And at one point somebody like you know, kicks someone in the side of the knee, and you like, they describe like the ligaments exploding and stuff. And it's also, there's a lot of moments like that in Fate of the Jedi as well, because it's a very action heavy book for Luke, or very action heavy series. But yeah, so I love that. And it was a good ending, you know, that final battle between Shimra, but with the subversion that, oh, this dude this dude who we didn't really know why they kept him around. He's just a shamed one, but for some reason he does have a little bit of authority, and he ends up being the guy the entire time.
Yeah, and it wasn't out of nowhere because they had teed him up several books before when Nomenor was running that whatever the hell you want to call it, his cult, his resistance, whatever you want to call it. So it was teed up a long time before.
He was the prophet.
Yes, the Yusha or whatever they called it. Yeah.
Yeah, Nomenor just taking advantage of everything he possibly could to try to control the shamed ones, I think.
For sure. And I think Shimra was supposed to be like 3 meters tall, you know, because they had genetically engineered him to be huge and stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting. And while we're talking about Coruscant, all these Bantam references, and later on in a bit here, we can go through some characters, but here was an interesting one. They took Eric, was that his name? And then they made him into that force monster guy with all the lightsabers coming out.
That was nuts, man. Yeah, that was nuts.
What a meta reference.
Yeah, they brought in a lot of old stuff. They really did. And this is why the Del Rey part of the EU is the best part. I don't think there's any denying it. I know a lot of the people that grew up reading the Bantam novels might not agree, but for me, it is because
Are you talking about Matt?
Well, I'm talking about Matt and people like Matt, I suppose.
Yes.
But this is when the full capability and potential of the EU is finally realized by people sitting down and planning stuff together as a team, which then led them to be able to pull more stuff together. And this is also at a time when they finally at Lucasfilm had people like specifically in charge of maintaining continuity. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And like very much focused on that is important to us and we want to make sure that it stays that way. So when you do these things, you can have these things happen. And then when on Star by Star, when Lomi and Welk and Raynar take that ship out and escape and leave everyone behind, that all comes back in the Dark Nest trilogy and is very important in that. There's nothing that
goes wasted.
There's nothing, there's stuff that maybe they'd never paid off, but there's always stuff that they had the potential for. And they always, when they had an opportunity, would bring things in like that when it made sense.
Yes, most definitely. Mara's illness. I just haven't.
Coruscant in general, too. The fact that Coruscant is shaped, captured and they're trying to shape it. And because the relationship that Jason has, this connection that he develops with the world brain, he's like sabotaging everything. Even like he's even doing it from a distance after he escapes. He's like still, basically communicating with the world brain to make sure that he makes it as difficult as possible for them to shape Coruscant. Because they've gotten to know the Yuzong Vong at this time. They've gotten to understand that these guys are very superstitious, that if like a bad thing happens, that means that, well, the gods must not be happy with us. Yuzan Tar, must not be happy with us.
Yeah, and that world brain is still around in later books up until his death. So it's pretty cool that they maintain that connection within all the Del Rey books as well. But yeah, it's crazy how they did what they did to Coruscant, shaping it. There's a rainbow in the sky, and all that crazy shit. It's like, wow, they really did this to Coruscant. That planet in the EU has been through so much. You guys were talking about on Matt's channel how they had to like shoehorn in an explanation why it went, okay, Empire, Alliance, New Republic, whatever you want to call them, back to Empire, back to New Republic. It's like it's been through so much. It's just crazy.
And then they what I like is that the shaping of Coruscant has direct ramifications, and they're always referenced in the future books when they're talking about the Undercity of Coruscant and how things are changed and how there's stuff people don't really know what the hell's going on in the Undercity because all of the shaping. So,
well, yeah, there's a line in one of the Legacy books where it's like there's some kind of creature and no one knows if it was from the Vong or from like just mutations from thousands of years of living in the underworld and stuff. I thought that was a pretty funny line. And then Mara's illness, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. I had totally forgotten about it until I read some Wikipedia entries last night. Like, I don't know what they were going for there, but she got cured. Everything's okay. I don't know if they wanted to make us think that, hey, she's going to go too because Chewie went. And just like with Han, is he really going to come back to the light and be a good guy again, or is he going to be an asshole? Maybe they wanted us to think that, hey, she's going to go next, and not only is she going to go, but she's going to go and take her child that was still within her with her. I don't know what they were going for there, but I guess it kind of added an aspect to Luke's response to what was going on around him, I guess.
It was weird, and maybe that's what it was. Maybe that's one of the things they needed for Luke to be, hesitant and stuff like that. But yeah, her illness that is from Nomenor, the spores that he uses to infect her. I think that the way she gets healed is kind of dumb.
The tears.
It's not the tears that do it. I think the tears like help stave it off, if I remember right. Correct.
I don't remember.
Maybe I'm completely wrong. So the tears helped, but I think that it's during the birth of Ben that, like, it's almost like Luke and her and Ben kind of mind merge, in the Force, and they almost burn Mara of all this stuff. And because Mara had been, it's kind of cool, like Mara had been containing her illness so that wouldn't affect Ben, while he's a part of her body,
Right.
So that had to take like crazy mental control. But I think that it's not until that moment, like as he's being born, that they can completely like purge it. Maybe I'm completely wrong though.
I'm trying to read here as we talk.
Maybe
tears...
maybe it was just the tears that cured her completely. But I don't remember.
Even though her illness appeared to be in remission, the Jedi were unsure if the tears were something which would be permanent. And it's making a resurgence. Yeah, to be continued, folks. Like, go look it up yourself. But I think you may be right, because I get the sense that I had the same reaction. Like, that's kind of, kind of cheesy. Like, they didn't know what else to come up with, so they just sat down and said, "Okay, guys, we got to come up with a way to cure her that's not cliched," and that's what they came up with. And I don't know. It didn't really matter at the end of the day, because I think that they were just trying to go for another shock value thing. Oh no, are they or not? Are they not going to kill her? And they didn't in the end. Well, not in that series. Spoiler alert. And then I was at, again, Celebration 2 2002, and one of the panels, they had all of them up there. I think it was the New Jedi Order panel, because they had a continuity one and some other ones, and Luceno was up there, and someone said, "I can't believe we're not gonna have Boba Fett in this series." And I think Pablo Hidalgo was emceeing the thing. He's walking around with a microphone, and then like Luceno leans over the table, grabs a mic, and says, "We're not at the end of the series yet." And this is like 3 years before, right? The unifying force. So at that point, they must have known they were going to do that, because obviously he was the author of that last book. So I don't know. That scene, I went back and read it, and I'm like, it's a little cheesy. Like, here he walks up, and oh no, we're fighting side by side, and Leia makes some kind of comment, and Han's like, let's just ride it, roll with it. He didn't say that literally, but in the Star Wars version. And we know what happens after that. They really don't become friends, but they can work together. I just felt like we got to include Boba Fett, so let's do it. What did you think of that?
It did seem a little bit kind of forced. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It did seem a little bit forced and like not necessary, but it does, it pays off a little bit afterwards. It pays off a little bit afterwards in Legacy of the Force. And I think Boba Fett's handled very well in that. So I think to get him,
Absolutely.
so I think that to get him back involved and with the Mandalorians and everything in the Yuzong Vong War, I think is the right thing. I don't know if they were thinking that far ahead. They definitely could have included him more in this if they had really wanted to. But it was fine. I didn't really have too many feelings other than, oh, that's kind of cool, but.
Yeah, and I think bringing him back, that was logical, using the Mandalorians, that the super commandos, and he's going to lead them, but having him side by side by the guy that he literally delivered to Jabba the Hutt and the Empire, that was a little, I don't know. I could have done without that, but it is what it is. And to your point in Legacy, which again, I haven't read the last one with him yet. I think I'm on the 7th book, about halfway through. So the next one will be the last Travis book that wraps up kind of his story arc, and it's been fantastic what they do with him and his granddaughter. So yeah, it is what it is, and I think they knew what they were doing. They just wanted to say, "Hey, Fett's in it," and at that point in time, and whatever. And then to go
So
back to the character,
I have to go back to Mara because I did find what I was looking for.
Okay, sweet. Let's hear it.
So the tears did definitely help it, and they thought it was in remission, but because she was expending like so much energy to keep all of that stuff away from Ben. Here's this paragraph. So moreover, Silgal learned that Jade Skywalker's disease was spreading 5 times as fast as it had before, with Jade Skywalker throwing all of her force, effort, and energy to keeping the disease from her son. The rest of her body was deteriorating. As she lay dying on the errant Venture, which I forgot he was born on the errant Venture, she, Skywalker, and their unborn son joined minds and purged the disease from her body together once and for all. And then Ben was born. So that's what I was thinking about. My memory was right. And it was just a little what, you couldn't do that. You know what I mean? Like you couldn't do that before. I don't know.
Like I said, they didn't know where they were going with it, I think. And they just said, okay, we got to get rid of this. And this is as good a way as any. So that's all it was. Maybe they thought they were going to kill her. I mean, before the series was out, and they decided not to. It was
a constant source of worry. We talked about Luke and his hesitancy and all this stuff. It was a constant source of fear for Luke. He never knew when Mara's injury or when her disease was going to take a turn for the worse, like what might happen. So yeah. I also love. I just thought about it now too. Ben gets born a little bit before Star by Star, I think, and. When the Jedi feel Anakin's death, Luke has this grief and this rage that's just building inside him, and to the point where Ben starts crying because he can feel the negative emotions of Luke because it's that powerful. And I think Luke he slams something. He slams a holo projector and destroys it with his hand. And
they follow up on that, Ryan, in Legacy when Jason has his daughter in his TIE fighter, whatever it is, TIE bomber. And he's so pissed off at what's happening that she just starts crying and then won't even go near him when they get back because she's force sensitive, obviously.
She felt that, yeah.
Yes.
And then I also think that Leia, in that moment of Anakin's death, Leia grabs Ben and won't let go of him. Doesn't want to let go of and everyone's really worried about what she might do. And I think Han has to come and take Ben from her and hug her or something.
It's like she freaks out, like she thinks that's her baby almost.
It's like she lost her baby, so she needs one. That's how it felt.
Yes. Crazy.
Yeah. And then of course at one point we also get the what's that Kawadi senator's name? Vicky Sesh or something.
Vicky shit. Yeah, I have her down as a new character. Total bitch.
Yeah, well, and she does she kidnap Ben at one point? So we get a good old fashioned kidnapping plot of the force sensitive children, just like we used to have in Bantam.
Traitor and all that type of stuff. Yeah, good character though. She's like the new Borsk Phalia almost, but worse because she actually does evil stuff. And he was just kind of a opportunist political asshole, whereas she is just a power hungry bitch for sure.
She gets a kid who I think she surgically alters him to look like Anakin to like cozy up to Leia and Han. You know, it's
Yes,
like, oh, I have
yes.
this orphan who looks like a spitting image of Anakin from a few years prior. And actually, that kid ends up coming back in, I think, Legacy. So
Nice. Well, speaking of which, they did that in Legacy where Jason gets that imposter for his own daughter, so he can like use her as like a replacement when he takes the real one. I thought that
yeah.
was messed up.
Oh, you know
And he
what?
makes her ride in a suitcase like for a whole hyperspace journey.
He actually comes back in Fate. Now that I'm thinking about it, because
Okay.
he comes back during Tahiri's trial. Because one of the big things in Fate of the Jedi is that Tahiri has a trial for everything that happened and everything that played out during Legacy. So
I wonder if she
and
wore shoes to the occasion.
I believe she did, and I don't think she was very comfortable with it.
Yeah. Very nice. But one other character before we read off some of these old and new characters, we really haven't talked about Leia much. Early on in the series, I think she was just kind of like she was in the rest of the like prior books, Bantam books, just kind of there. She's doing political stuff. But by the end, right? She's like, "Hey Luke, I'm done with all this stuff. I'm done with politics. I want to be a Jedi." So we kind of see her make the decision, and then in the following books, like in Swarm War, she actually starts training and actually trying to be a Jedi. I thought that was a cool decision and a transformation for one of the big three.
Yeah, and they'd obviously she'd been putting that out for so long, and it made
Hmm.
sense. It's not to say it didn't make sense because she was so important to what the New Republic was doing, especially during the beginning. But it always seemed like they would call in the Solos whenever they needed something. Like there's nobody else in the fucking galaxy that could do anything
Yeah, yeah.
other than the Solos. And so yeah, we do see that, and obviously, I think that Leia doesn't go on maybe as much of a roller coaster journey, even though she obviously loses a child in it. You
Hmm.
know, um, that we see Han go through in the beginning, and then Luke go through a total transformation of his perspective. But it's almost like for Leia, who has been working so hard to overthrow the Empire with the rebellion and then to establish this new republic. That had been her life's mission.
Hmm.
And, in a few years, it gets completely wiped and it's done. The Galactic Alliance is now a thing, And
Hmm.
so now they're partnering with the Empire and like all these things. So in a way, her entire world was broken. And it's like everything that she'd been doing was for nothing. So that may have been one of the reasons that she finally decided to do that, because she had been trying to operate within the realms of government for so long, and it wasn't effective.
Yeah, and by legacies, she's just kicking ass. I mean, it's pretty amazing. It shows that she had the potential the whole time, but really just not the will to do it. Not as powerful as Luke, but you compare her what she does in some of the fights and stuff to what the other Jedi do. She's pretty high up there because she kicks some ass, and it's all legitimate too. It doesn't seem forced or anything. Um, Yeah, so another good character arc. She does change and all that stuff. But Bantam, old and new, of course, Kip Duran, great use of that character, a guy who had done terrible things, right? It's almost like, why is this guy allowed to walk free, like destroying an entire planet, even though it was like Imperials and stuff? Why is he not like in prison for life? Oh, the dark side made him do it, pretty much. But he's there, and he's kind of like a opposite to Luke. He's kind of like Luke's foil, I think, the whole time. Like he could be a potential uh, rival to take over the Order, at least in terms of populism, because I think he has a crew of Jedi who look up to him and stuff.
He has
So
a lot of the younger Jedi appreciate the
yeah,
fact that he's and he's cool, right? They want to play that off that Kips doesn't. He leads this starfighter squadron. He's got like this. He's like he's a tall, attractive. He's got long hair. Like he's supposed to be cool, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, he's gonna get a lot of people on his side. But I think Kip too, like, he goes on a journey through this as well.
Oh, big time.
He is the first one that truly encounters the Vong in battle. And his entire squadron gets wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
This thing that he was obviously so proud of gets wiped out, including his apprentice. Miko Regalia, I believe is his name.
Mm-hmm.
Who survives, but ultimately dies to save Danny Kui, I think. Sacrifices himself with, because they had to fight off those two warriors so that Danny could get free. And I feel like they dropped Danny, in later books a little bit.
Yeah, I have her on the list. And we did a worst characters live stream a couple of weeks ago, and I had her written down, but it never came up. But it's not that she's worst. It's almost like she was just there for no reason. I think they thought they knew what they wanted to do with her, but they never did it. So I think Jason gives her the cold shoulder toward the end, saying, "Hey, I just want to be friends." So he kind of did the friend zone thing with her because I think she liked him, but she was kind of there because we got to have a new character, and then someone who's had experience with the Vong, and she did on that outpost research station thing. But yeah, kind of a lame character, honestly.
She kind of
pretty blonde scientist girl.
She kind of reminded me, not so much in how they looked, but in I guess what purpose they served to Kui Zux from the Jedi Apprentice series, who was the architect of the Death Star and everything, and of the Sun Crusher. I mean, very different things, but in terms of, they have the scientific background to be able to understand and break this down a little more to some of these people. She was very instrumental actually in the Yamask jamming that took place later on, and in things like that. I believe she helped develop that technology. It was even in Destiny's Way, because I think Destiny's Way is when that's when Jason escapes, and Jason comes back when they're on Mon Calamari, that they're refiguring the government, and Jason, comes back from being tortured with Vergier.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Vergier's imprisoned, and Luke's trying to learn from her. And Jason, he's like, just take a vacation. And so him and Danny go out scuba diving, I think.
Yeah.
And they're floating. So they are trying to do a little bit of are we going to do a romance? But they end up not.
Yes. Yeah, because he's just not a romantic guy at the end of the day. Let's be honest. He's too weird and self-absorbed, whether he's a good guy or a bad guy.
I think he's so much trying to figure out his relationship with himself and with the Force, right? And it's not until he goes after the series. It's not until he goes on his 5-year sojourn to come to terms with himself and who he is, and that's when he comes back completely confident about who he is, and that's when he goes and knocks up Tenno Ka. So
Yep, for sure. And then he has all those weird powers that he learns, and
which I love. You learn more about him in Fate of the Jedi, but also a quick aside: the fact that Tenno Ka was able to delay the development of their kid to throw off people who would predict that Jason was the father. I don't know if you remember that, or if you've read that yet, but she does that. She basically, because everyone knew that Jason had come and seen Tenno Ka after he came back. But she essentially has instead of a 9-month gestation, I think she does a couple more months than that to throw people off, to be well, no, Jason wasn't visiting then, so he couldn't have been the father, kind of thing.
We're going to have to come up with a name for that force power, because I can think of some pretty crude ones for that. But no, I don't remember that. That's pretty cool, though, that she even thought to do that. That's badass.
I think so anyway. I'm pretty sure. I'll
have to look it up. It sounds about right. Because they kept that super secretive,
They did, yeah, to the point where he erased Ben's memory and shit because of that.
Oh man.
And they had the Gorog nest or whoever found out about it. So
Yep. And then Borsk, of course, we talked about him. He had the bomb, the grenade. He kind of served as bait until a bunch of warriors showed up. Boom, they're gone.
it was probably
Great
like
moment for him.
it was probably like a Baradium cluster or something based on how they talk about Baradium and how I don't feel like we heard about Baradium until this when they started using it in shadow bombs, you know?
Right. And then they bring even back some of the Carillion trilogy characters, those Drawl people that we met in those books when they go back to deal with Centerpoint. So lots of cool references. Of course, the Brian Daly characters, some of them come back, courtesy of John Daly, who was very good friends with him. And then other new characters. You had Crayfade, that other Bothan that wasn't anything like Thalia. He was like that admiral.
And I believe they're related. I think they're distant cousins or something.
Yes.
But yeah, and not only not only just that, but we get introduced to a new class of ship with the Bothan assault cruisers, I think. I don't know exactly if that's the right nomenclature or not. But yeah, and then Crayfade, because of what happens to Thalia, I believe, because he's part of his family, ends up declaring it's like jihad. It's basically what it is. It's like literal genocide. Like that's what gets declared. It's a Bothan thing where it's like, you've wronged us to the point where we are going to wipe you up from the face of the galaxy.
Yes. Very cool. Like, we learn more and more about the Bothans all the time. Mm-hmm. And then Cal Lomas, you mentioned earlier, and he stayed around for a very long time in the books.
Mm-hmm. A decent 2-book series. He ends his reign in what is it called? Legacy of the Force.
Yep.
But yeah, and Calamas was interesting. He kind of just came. He was literally, I don't even know if I heard about him until Destiny's Way. I don't know if he was mentioned. You had a couple senators that were in that. You had Ferrer Rodon, I believe, who was kind of a piece of shit from earlier in those novels. And then you had Plo, I believe that's how you say the Quarren's name.
It is, yeah.
Who is an asshole. And so, yeah, they rigged the election so Calamas won.
No, Omas was around since Vector Prime. So he was down since the beginning. He was the New Republic guy, whatever they call that, chief of state, I think is what they called it. So he was around.
What?
But yeah.
Calamas? No, well, Thalia was the chief of state.
Or he was senator, whatever the hell he was.
Well, he was the senator from Alderaan. Like, he was Alderaan's representation in the Senate. Which, even though they didn't have a planet, they still had representation because of the number of Alderanians living in the galaxy, I believe.
Yeah, he was some kind of representative.
He was probably on the Security Council or something.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So he was, or the War Council or whatever. So when talking about should we take action, he was probably there. So I believe there's a Wookiee senator who was on their side as well of the Jedi. Because that's a whole theme in this, is how adversarial the government is to Jedi interventionism.
Yes. Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's kind of the dynamic between Corrin and Jason and Luke and a few of the others, all their different opinions. Kip. Here's another one. A lot of Jedi, right? Lots of new Jedi. A lot of them forgettable. But what about Ganner Rysode?
I love Ganner Rysode. He's one of my favorite characters. I named my first SWTOR character Ganner, and I named my second one Rysode. He's a guy who, when you get introduced to him, he is such a asshole, and it makes it even more so because he's an adversary to. Well, one, he's a follower of Kip and what Kip wants to do. Correct. 2, he thinks he knows everything. But 3, he's an adversary to one of the most liked people in the EU, Corran Horn. And in the Dark Tide novels, just that experience changes him. It does. But it doesn't completely change him yet. He still needs to go through more. And And that I think when Corran is, because they are at odds completely, Luke sets it up so that two people who are have complete different perspectives on how they should handle things have to go to this planet and investigate something. And I think Luke knows that by putting Corran in charge, it'll force Ganner to kind of have some perspective, and he does. Now, Corran damn near dies during this.
Yeah.
And they do a fake out. They do one of those everything faded to black, but Corran knew that he had done what he needed to kind of thing. And then he wakes up in a back to tank or some shit. But yeah. And so the journey that you get to see Ganner go on from that to, okay, well, maybe there is a point to this, but still having a lot of arrogance about things. He gets wounded, I believe. I think he gets slashed by an amphistaff, and that gets a scar across his face. So it messes up his pretty boy image. And then you take him from that point, and really the next big interaction we get with him after, I think, the Battle for Ithor, I think he's around for the Battle for Ithor, is Star by Star. And Ganner is the decoy leader for all the kids, because Anakin is the real leader. So at that point, Ganner wanted to be in charge of Corran Horn, right? A very experienced Jedi. Ganner was willing to take a backseat and as a result take punishment for being the supposed leader of this group of 20 Jedi, for being the one that's in charge, and take all the torture and all the punishment, more so than anyone else, to allow Anakin to truly be the leader of this group. And that in and of itself shows a real humbleness from Ganner. Ultimately leading to what we see in is it?
It's in Traitor. I know what you're going to talk about.
The end of Traitor.
His Gandalf moment.
His Gandalf moment. You shall not pass. It is one of the coolest moments in Star Wars history. From a character,
bodies piling up, left and right, just fantastic.
Yeah, where he will not let them pass through the gates so that Jason can do what he needs to do with the world brain. And the messed up part is, Jason manipulates Ganner into this. Jason has he's at the point where this whole gray Jedi type of mentality, where it's not about your actions, it's all about what your intentions are. And if your intention ultimately is for the greater good, then you can justify any type of bad behavior, even tricking a friend to doing something. That's what he does to Ganner.
Yeah, there's no dark side. Yeah, there is no dark side. Yeah,
which is a weird place, and they kind of go away from that pretty quickly after.
Big time.
But it's an interesting thing, though. It is definitely interesting and something that's a legitimate argument to have, I think.
Well, and it was cool in Traitor because there weren't that many characters. Honestly, it's a lot of Jason and Vergere, and then, we got to bring in someone else. I'm looking at the Dramatis Personae right now. There are 6. 6. So the fact that they chose him out of all the Jedi they could have chosen, and he dies in that, right? So they brought his character arc to an end, and they did it in an amazing way.
Well, yeah, and to have Jason gets a glimpse of the future where the Yuzong Vong are literally worshiping a deity known as the Ganner.
Yes.
Because he takes on all these Vong warriors just one after another in single combat to give Jason the time that he needs. And it's such an epic, cool moment.
Big time. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they had that planned out, but whenever Stover wrote that, he probably looked at what had been done and he said, hey, look at this asshole Jedi character. I can really bring his arc to an end there. But they might have planned it. Either way, the way it turned out was awesome. Great. I think his exact words were none shall pass, but it was obviously that trope, from myth where Gandalf and even Obi-Wan had that moment in A New Hope, right? Where he didn't say the words, but he kept Vader busy while the heroes escaped. It's same exact concept.
It's so I have the quote right here between Nomenor and Ganner. There are thousands of warriors out here. You are only one man. I am only one Jedi. You're insane. No, I am Ganner. This threshold is mine. I claim it for my own. Bring on your thousands, one at a time or all in a rush. I don't give a damn. none shall pass.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's vintage Stover right there for sure.
Yeah, it's fantastic, dude.
Yeah, that's one of the best books. One of the most interestingly written Star Wars books, as all the Stover ones are. Um, and then one other we haven't mentioned, Allston, really quick. Fantastic duology where let's take a breather and still continue the storyline, yet get some Wedge, get some Starfighter activity, get some of the humor, right? We have to bring some of the humor back into it. And that's what I felt like Alston was the best at. Great little duology in the what was it? Rebel Dream and Rebel Stand. What was the name of the actual duology though? The
It's like Enemy Lines or something like that.
Enemy Lines, yes. I
And I
loved it.
think
Twin Sun Squadron.
and I believe that's if I'm recalling the right books, it's when Wedge he has like a task force and he takes Borealis, maybe.
Yep.
And Savong La's grandfather is commanding, or his father, who had like come out of retirement, is commanding an army, and they use the Lusankia and turn it into like a suicide weapon almost to defeat one of their big ships. It's really cool. But it is a callback to Borealis that was in the X-Wing series.
Correct.
Became a very important world. There might have been 2 battles there, actually, if not one. But yeah, so that was cool. And I really like when Wedge gets brought back into it. Because it's funny because you have Akbar and Wedge and these guys who are retired that kind of get drawn back into it for this conflict. Which is pretty neat.
I think Akbar winds up dying in Destiny's Way. Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't know if he dies in Destiny's Way, but in Destiny's Way, they consult him and he comes up with a plan. He comes up with a plan for how to defeat the Vong. And that's the plan that they do use to defeat them. He does die relatively quickly after. I don't remember if it's in that or not, but Winter's there with him, looking over him, which is, again, like that just goes to further the idea that Winter and Akbar fucked at one point in time.
Yeah.
The fact that she's there with him, taking care of him in his last days.
Yes,
and he's just
we've definitely mentioned that, like numerous. We've covered that many times because there was ample evidence that something was happening, and it's weird. Like Kevin J. Anderson or someone had a weird fish fetish, so we all had to like put up with that. But I think it was mentioned. I don't think it showed his death scene, but I do believe it was in Destiny's Way because I'm looking at his appearances, and that's the last one that doesn't say mentioned only.
But I don't think he died in that. I think that they left Mon Calamari. I think it might have been like an off book death. Like he just died of old age. You know what I mean? Like I don't think he died in that. So
yeah, it just says near the very end of the invasion, shortly before the Battle of Yuzantar, he died. So probably sometime during Unifying Force. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of new characters. Ganner, by far, probably the best new Jedi character. They use the old stuff. Center Point Station, cool way of using it. You brought back Luke's cousin, or I'm sorry, Han's cousin, Thraken, who's just one of those great characters, even in Legacy, where he finally dies. One of those guys that finds a way to keep making like a comeback, like a tin pot dictator in some shithole country that always finds a way to get out of prison and take over the country again because he riles up some kind of new populist movement. Love it. Good stuff. It's very true to life, I think, because those kinds of things actually happen. So no matter how terrible of a person you are, there's always a way to get reelected. So
yep, that's true.
But that's all I can think of, Ryan. I mean, we could talk for 5 more hours, but I think we covered the basics and then some. And I guess the very last thing is, if we had to do some kind of rating, I don't know, maybe a 10 scale, how would you rate the series overall? And which is your favorite book?
I think that Star by Star is one of my favorite Star Wars books, period, of all time.
Mm-hmm.
It's very long. It might actually be the longest Star Wars book. I wouldn't be surprised if that's
It
the
is.
case. But yeah, the journey that you get to see the Solo children go on, it pays off so much of what gets set up throughout this initial series. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, seeing Anakin sacrifice himself and become one with the Force in that moment, and to see like what it does to Tahiri and the journey it sends her on, and obviously Jaina, the dark path it sends her on, and the inspiration that it is for Jason. And then for Jason, who has been so hesitant about his role as a Jedi, as a person, as a man, to
Mm-hmm.
see what Anakin did, and for Anakin to turn to Jason and say, "You're in charge," was huge. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
that moment to realize that my brother, who I've been feuding with for 2 years, he's trusting me to get the job done. Which then results in Jason sacrificing himself, or attempting to sacrifice himself for all of his knowledge, to make sure that he kills the Voxen Queen and that his friends can escape and to save the Jedi. It's such a powerful moment. And obviously all the resulting stuff that happens with the emotional stuff. That's my favorite book. In terms of the series as a whole, I think it's an 8 out of 10. I really like it. Legacy of the Force is my favorite Star Wars series. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't give it, I can't put it all the way up there, but I think it's really good. It's not for everybody, though. It's very dark. It's very long. It's very drawn out. But for me, it's exactly the type of Star Wars that I thought we should have.
Yeah, and they knew what they were doing. They could tell it chronologically with sequential books, boom, 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 and know what they were doing. And they could still pivot and adjust, right? Like if they said, "Well, this isn't kind of working, so we're going to do something else." Well, you're writing the books in order so you can do what you want. So good point. I say 8.5, and for me that's huge because something I really like, I probably rate 6.5. So 8.5 means I think it's way up there in terms of quality and enjoyment. I try to rate stuff on how much do I enjoy it, how much would I want to go back and actually read it again, watch it again, listen to it again, whatever it is. So 8.5, and I'm going to go with Trader because it was so different. I remember reading it, and then like I read it again. Like a buddy at work had also bought it, and we both read it again because we thought it was so awesome. Just the writing style where he does it like in the, what was that, like second person, is that what the tense would be, like Jason, or in the present tense Jason Solo runs toward the, you know what I mean, like some of those
Yeah.
sections so different. And then just like the character transformation, the Ganner moment, it was something different, and it really got me hooked on Stover as a writer. And I think he's quit writing because for some reason he kind of lost his spirit to write, and he's been trying to get it back and stuff if you follow him on social media. So
Well,
kind of sad.
I think he did Shadows of Mindor, right?
Yes,
That would
yes.
make me want to lose the ability to write too. So that kind of makes sense.
Well, he had these Trials of Kane, this his own franchise that he was writing, and people love this Kane character. But yeah, he just kind of lost the will to write. But I love, except for that one, all of his Star Wars books. Shatterpoint, fantastic. Revenge of the Sith, fantastic. So yeah, 8.5 Trader, great series. Um, but that's about it, everyone. We've been going almost 2 hours, so longer than we planned. But
Yeah.
again, this is a very heavy topic with a lot to talk about.
We
Ryan,
could have
thanks for doing it.
we could have talked for literally 8 more hours and we wouldn't even
Oh,
scratch the
absolutely.
surface of this series. So
Absolutely. And what I'm thinking about doing for Legacy once I'm done, I'm thinking about rotating people in to try and get, like, I want to find someone that didn't like it, find someone that thought it was okay, then find someone that, they really liked it for a different reason, like someone like Lethal that likes Darth Kaitis. Like, well, tell me why. Like, why do you like it? And then, do a series like that, have a different person in. Because I'm going to finish probably early June, maybe. I have so much going on that I don't have a lot of reading time, but I've got about 2.5 books left, and then I'll be ready to do that. So maybe sometime in the summer you can come back and give me your thoughts on that series, which we've kind of touched on tonight. So yeah,
that's actually the thing that makes this era of Star Wars so great, is that you can't talk about simply NJO without talking about how it affects everything else and everything that it sets up. And New Jedi Order sets everything up for everything that happens in the future. We didn't even talk about the Hapens, right? The fact that the Hapens are truly brought to the forefront in this, and they are important in every single galactic conflict from here on out. And they pay a price for getting involved too, which has to do with Centerpoint Station and Anakin
3/4 of
their
fleet wiped out.
Yeah. And we actually have the death of the Hapen Queen in this, which results in Tenel Ka being very much involved and things. So yeah, this series was the foundation for a decade and a half of expanded universe.
Yeah. And the architects of it, Shelley Shapiro, Sue Rostoni, the actual authors themselves, Troy Denning had to have a big say in it because he kept coming back to write all those books and stuff. So a lot of people worked to make it a thing, and I think it was a huge achievement, and we can read it forever. That's what's great about it. It's not going anywhere, and no one can say it doesn't count, because we know what counts, and to us it counts. So we're going to keep reading it. But thanks again, man, for being here. And then maybe several months from now we can come back and do Legacy of the Force. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Everyone, we'll catch you next time on Expanded University Short Courses. The Expanded University, imaginative and boundless.